Welcome to God's Own Hands. ഒരു രോഗിയുടെ മനസ്സ് തിരിച്ചറിഞ്ഞ് അവരുടെ വ്യഥയും ബലഹീനതകളും മനസ്സിലാക്കി ചികിത്സിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ് ഒരു സൈക്കാട്രിസ്റ്റിന്റെ ചുമതല. ദുബായ് കരാമ അപ്പോളോ ക്ലിനിക്കിലെ സൈക്കാട്രിസ്റ്റായ ഡോക്ടർ ബാലു പിച്ചയാണ് ഇന്ന് നമ്മോടൊപ്പം ഗോഡ്സ് ഓൺ ഹാൻഡ്സിൽ. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ചികിത്സാനുഭവങ്ങൾ കേൾക്കാം. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
Doctor, let's just start with your professional and academic life. So, how you become a medical person, especially a specialist in psychiatry?
So looking back at my life, and I never thought I would really become a doctor. I grew up in a sort of family where there were no doctors, so I was the first one to come into the medical field. My father was a space scientist, so I was mostly interested in engineering. But then one thing led to another. I got admissions both into medical and engineering schools, and I thought, I'll give it a try. So for the first 3 years, I never thought I'll complete the course and practice as a doctor, because it was more basic sciences, looking at anatomy, physiology, and but once I started seeing patients and becoming a part of their story, I became very interested. So that journey continued till I finished my MBBS from Stanley Medical College in Chennai. So during my last year of training, but that's what we call as a CRRI, the house surgeon we call it. Yeah. And I was exposed to so many people who have what we call as normal blood tests or regular whatever investigations that we do, but they continue to have symptoms, mainly pain or some worry about something. And I quickly realized that patients may not always come to the doctor for the reasons the doctor thinks that they come to them. There are many underlying things which are not spoken about. And that was the time when this software was booming. So I thought about, what's the software in the body? There's something more than just the body, as in the flesh and the bones and the skin and whatnot. I was more fascinated by those, but I thought, there's something more than that. So when we explore the software of the system, the body mechanism, I thought, there's something called the mind. And then I left India to the UK, particularly to think about health systems, and I was more interested in how many people can be helped, particularly after looking at so many people getting crowded in government hospitals. And so one thing again led to another. I was initially working in medicine and surgery in the UK, but then I quickly changed to behavioral science to just give a try for 6 months. I enjoyed it so much that I continued with that ever since.
Doctor, when coming to this academic life, is there any inspirational person or inspirational incident that lead you to choose psychiatry as your specialization?
So when I was working in India, as I mentioned, after my graduation, I was working briefly in a rheumatology department, and rheumatology concerns with mainly pain in the joints. So it's autoimmune conditions, inflammation of the joints. So most people come with joint pain, back pain. But many people had normal tests, and they still had pain. They would have issues with sleep. The condition affected their general well-being, their relationship at home. And I didn't feel that was adequately addressed, for their symptoms to go back. And I always considered patients as my inspiration, because they bring in the stories. And our job as doctors is to connect with their stories and help them find some solution to some of their problems, not necessarily just looking at symptoms and thinking about just the disease. So again, as I said, the patients became an inspiration for my search to find answers to some of their problems. And in the UK, after about 6 months of training, I went into what they called then as a basic psychiatric training in a place called Sheffield, and there was a professor named Steve Peters, and now he's very famous for what they call as a chimp management, chimp paradox. He's written a book called Chimp Paradox. He had a very interesting way of explaining the workings of a mind, and my understanding, it almost felt like a mathematical model of the brain and the mind. And as I was inclined more towards maths, I thought this is interesting. I could really pursue this, and I have ever since, looked at the mind more from a mathematical point of view, and from a technology point of view as well, and it becomes very interesting. So yeah, there have been lots of inspirations, but these two are things that kind of started my journey.
It's quite interesting. And when you started your profession, like what was your first job or any experiences in that job? Can you share?
So we have to go through in the UK. So I trained in postgraduate medical training. That's my psychiatric training in the UK, and we have to rotate through various departments. So the primary specialty is what we call as general adult psychiatry, which is looking after people over the ages of 18. So 16 to 18 is a gray area, adulthood, and mostly 18 plus. And then we rotate through looking after old age people and children. And what I was fascinated by was two things. The response of children to a compassionate care and a listening ear. That really changed my perspective. I had a very, very interesting 14-year-old girl who came from a very affluent background. And it so happened that her eating disorder was affecting the whole family, including the dog. It was interesting that the dog was taken to the vet before even the girl was taken to a specialist, because the family really felt that the dog was doing well. So the vet advised that the dog is picking up some stress from the family. And that's how they realized that there were more things happening in the family. And then she came to see us and then stay in our inpatient unit for a while. And it was fascinating to see these young children behave very differently in a unit with good support, and when they've been struggling at home or in school. No one was to blame, but sometimes the power of listening can transform lives. And I saw that in 14-year-olds. And that really sort of increased my belief in what I did. And so I continued with that.
Okay. While coming to UAE, you might have faced so many changes in practice and mode of practice and all. So, what was the most difficult challenge you faced during your initial practice in UAE?
Sure. I still have a license to practice in UK, UAE, and India. UAE was an interesting story. I practiced within the NHS. There's a National Health Service in the United Kingdom, and I was in charge of the primary care mental health in a place called Kensington. It's a Royal Borough of Kensington, where we have many people from this region, from GCC, coming to live there. And also had private practice where I saw a number of people from this region. And before the pandemic, I used to visit some of the people here, who used to come and see me, because I might want to get some history from their families. And during the pandemic, they were finding it very difficult to come to the UK, and that's how I started to come to the UAE. And in terms of challenges, certainly this is a very different market when compared to the UK. The reason being, UAE is full of expats. The majority of the population come from different parts of the world. The problems are very different. They're very lonely, stressed. I do look after some of the local population, but then their problems are very similar to what we face in the United Kingdom. And generally, what I see between the difference between the East and the West is people in the East, particularly the Asian subcontinent, kind of see mental health as a taboo. So they may not necessarily seek support very early, and they get consumed by their emotions, whereas people in the West may see their mind as a separate entity, and they may be able to articulate some of their difficulties very clearly to the professional and get the help. And here there is a lot of reliance on medicines. So more medicines prescribed here, and less of what we call a psychological or talking treatment. But there are more holistic treatments available here. So although people are similar in their sort of disease profile and the way they want to access services, the belief systems can determine how people access services and what is more commonly used. But it's been a great experience being in the UAE, and we are also very proudly able to use some of the amazing hospitality facilities UAE provides. So I have a wellness center in a five-star wellness resort in UAE where we get guests from all over the world and who want to get healed in a holistic environment. And UAE allows us to do that. It's a very progressive country. So many ideas that can be implemented here as well. So we are excited being in the UAE, but as I said, because it's majority of the population is expats, there are some unique challenges that the expat population faces.
Doctor, while coming to psychosomatic disorders, we have most of the cases which are psychosomatic. So how you assess a patient coming in front of you?
With any disorder, we have to rule out what we call as organic or physical reasons for why they have the problem. With psychosomatic problems, one of the most common symptoms we face is pain. People have unexplained pain. Many people have neurological symptoms that can't be explained as well. Fainting attacks or fits, which may not be what we call as non-epileptiform fits. And there are certain behavior which can't be explained, which kind of raises concerns among family members. But it's always important to rule out physical reasons for their symptoms. So that's number one. And number two, you need to help them understand, but this is something which is very difficult to do, help them understand that there is a perception, there is a perception system which allows us to perceive the symptoms even if there is a problem or not. And there could be other reasons why we imagine or perceive things. So when patients understand that the mind is also an essential part of one's experience of the problem, the disease, then they want to do something about it. Many people look for validation. When there is a symptom, they want to know what's wrong, so they look for a diagnosis or a disease. So they are slightly upset when you say that there is nothing wrong with them physically, but there could be some mental problem. So immediately their response is one of resistance. No, I don't have a mental problem. But the way we describe it is sometimes we perceive the problem differently to what it is. Hence, we need to address that as an issue. And most people then understand that. So we think about it as a mind and body medicine. So bringing both body and mind together. And in the ancient Indian ways or Chinese medicine methods, there's always an emphasis on both body and mind, and the spiritual practices also come in. So a holistic approach is needed when we think about psychosomatic disorders.
So while telling about this psychological or psychiatric cases, we consider it as a problem for the brain or something related to brain. So how can you explain about that?
So with behavioral problems, I think behavioral problems are most commonly referred to as psychiatric and psychological issues. As a society, we are more open to think about someone's behavior. So you observe what others are doing and come to a conclusion as to how their mental state would be. Yeah, but it may not necessarily be the case. Their behavior probably may not be always indicate what is actually happening behind the behavior. So it's very important to explore the behavior. Although the behavior allows us to have some insight into what the person is going through, but the reasons of the behavior will have to be explored in detail, because no two people's behavior is caused by the same problem. So that's number one. Yeah. So a very thorough assessment, looking at what is driving the behavior, is important. Like with any discipline in medicine, more than the symptoms, it is important to look at what is causing the symptoms. The same way, more than just the behavior, it is important to look beyond the behavior and looking at the causes of the behavior. That's very important. And number two, it's important that we prevent these complications in behavior happening. So more knowledge, more insight, more awareness is very needed, in helping people understand some of these behaviors, which then can sort of be modified so that it doesn't impact the person and the people around.
While coming to psychiatry field, what are the new developments in the field?
There are so much happening. So when you think about sort of mental health, behavioral science, particularly Corona pandemic has brought out a lot of hidden things within the society. Thanks to the internet, people are having more awareness. It has good and bad things, but in my view, a tool like the internet should be used for good. So more awareness means people are asking the right questions. There are so many screening tools that are available for people to screen themselves. And there are genetic tests available. A lot of data analysis and gathering is happening. Many apps and sort of biomarkers are being now looked into as well. So apps helps in monitoring people's behavior. Those chatbots, help people converse very, very well. And there is more advancements in brain science, looking at the brain from a neuro um, point of view, more sort of quantitative EEGs, neurofeedbacks. There is magnetic treatments available these days. And one of the very exciting things that's happening in the field of behavioral science now is the research into use of psychedelic medicines. Although the medicines have been around for a long time, their applications have been looked at again, very carefully these days. So in my view, this is the era of the mind. The mind is the biggest asset we all hold. And in the knowledge economy, the mind becomes very important. And there's so much happening out there to help us have a healthy mind. So the outlook is very positive. Although everything I said may not have come into the clinical realm, but there is a good chance that all of these things will be available to everyone. But that's my dream as well, to help people live a better quality of life.
So when one should start treatment, or when one should approach a psychiatrist as a treatment?
I would say, not all mental health problems needs a specialist psychiatrist. But when you feel that you're not your own self, start looking into yourself. Speak to someone about it. We all know when things are not going well, but we sometimes tend to postpone seeking support. I would say you are your best judge. Speak to someone, and then if you feel that that conversation with that someone is not really getting you anywhere or helping you, have a conversation with a specialist. Many times it may not be a very well defined problem that takes you to a doctor. But if you feel that you're not your own self and you're not performing the way you do, your relationships are suffering, your work is suffering, don't wait for serious symptoms to appear. Speak to a specialist straight away.
As an advice, what can you give our viewers for a good mental health?
Oh, there's lots of things one can do. When I think about sort of mind, mental health, I always am reminded of our most precious possessions that we use on a day-to-day basis. There are many things that we use, our cars, our air conditionings, our fridges, or whatever that we use. When we use something and we really sort of like using that a lot, we always make sure that it is maintained well, because we don't want our prized possessions to let us down when we need it the most. Just like our cars, just like our air conditioning. And when the mind is our most prized possession, think about maintaining your mind health. It doesn't mean a visit to the doctor's office every week. It means having a routine every day, waking up at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, having a routine throughout the day, eating well, so having a good relationships, talking to friends, family, and addressing any problems as and when they arise, and not postponing the problem. I would say make every effort to just be yourself. Find a space, a safe space, where you can just be yourself, because we live in a world where there's a lot of pretense. We have to fake a lot of things. There's a lot of pressure for us to perform. but we need a space for us to be ourselves.
Doctor, coming to this psychiatry, you have experience from different part of world, and what will be your future plan, or what would you like to contribute to the world?
My future plan is really to make mental health care more accessible and affordable. And thanks to so much information and tools that we have in our disposal, things like ChatGPT are really, something that I look forward to. Can help us collect accurate data in real time over a period of time, which will allow people to be more resourceful, more insightful, and resilient. And so, what I call is a lead to less reliance on very expensive health services. So prevention is better than a cure. Corona has taught us a lot about cleanliness and the vaccine and the need for all sorts of preventive methods. And I'm very confident that we are learning a lot in the mental health space to prevent complications, and technology is certainly going to be enabling us to do that. So I would say, yeah, I'm very excited about the future, and I have a lot of faith in our people, in humanity, that we will take this forward as a society.
Doctor, can you share some unforgettable experiences from your practice?
I have two major things that have really transformed the way I practice. This is from both a clinical and a business point of view. So a long time ago, I used to have a young student who couldn't afford to pay my fee, but he would regularly come. And after a while, he became a very popular director in Hollywood. But I can't say many names, but then he used to still continue to come and see me. And he would say that, and I would tell him that he didn't need my services because he's done well, but he would say that he needs to pay something back. And then we together did something called pay forward. So he would then pay for people like him, for students who needed that help. And by sharing his story, a lot of people were inspired by that. The other thing I really cherish the most is I did something called a pay what you want service. I would consider myself to be probably the only one at my level working in a place called Harley Street in London, one of the most expensive clinic areas in the world. And we developed something called pay what you want. And I had a person who was a taxi driver who gave up 2 football tickets to spend some time with me and drive me back home, which was not necessary. But he insisted because he valued the time with me. And I later learned that he was a fireman who suffered from what we call as post-traumatic stress disorder. And he had changed his life to be a taxi driver, but still suffered from some of the scars of this previous job that he did. And then I realized that it's not people who have wealth or influence that they can easily access services. People who are general, ordinary people who have an ambition to make a difference can be helped to make a difference. And I'm very humbled that I could be a part of people's journey, these kind of people's journey, while they transform their lives, their families' lives, and the lives of others. So I have many, many stories because every person I meet stays as a friend. They are with me for life. We don't really think about it as a transaction, as a one-off patient. We allow them an opportunity to connect continuously. We learn from each other, we develop, we contribute. So I must say I'm very privileged. I've worked in multiple businesses, and I also, for a brief period, left medicine to do my MBA at Oxford University and worked in investment management. But I've always come back to this, and I don't think I will leave this. I started off by thinking that I will never be a doctor, but now I begin to think that I can't be anyone other than a doctor. Even if I don't have a license to practice, I will still uphold the principles of being a doctor, being that compassionate human being. And it's all inspiration from my patients.
Doctor, while telling about these treatment experiences, most of the people are reluctant to take medicines internally, like they think it is chemicals and all. So, what is the actual treatment method that you follow in your practice?
First and foremost, it's about understanding what is wrong. Like with anything in life, you invite a plumber to your house or an electrician. before they take the tools, they must look at what the issue is, ask the right questions, and come to a conclusion on what is wrong. Only then the tools can be put to use in the right way. In the same way, the body and the mind is important. So we need to look at a very thorough assessment. So I insist on having an assessment before the patient is given any form of intervention. Sadly, there are practices which will be more focused on selling the equipment or the medicine. So before a problem is thoroughly understood, they would start treatment. If that is the case, then the medicine may have more side effects. Patients also sometimes, without proper consultation, will carry on taking the medicine. The medicines have more and more side effects. In my experience, medicines and interventions should be used as a tool. The patients will have to learn how to use the tool to get the most out of the tool. The tool is not to blame. The user is very important in this. So, as I mentioned, first is assessment. Spend as much time as possible to understand the nature of the problem very well. Number two, many people will come to us when there is a problem, when there is a pain, when there is a symptom. Symptomatic relief is very important to gain the confidence of the patient and also give them some relief. But that is not all. When the symptoms are relieved, the patient is in a better position to understand their problem. The third is to help them learn methods not to have the symptoms again. Fourth is to work holistically with their body, mind, and the spirit, the soul, to have a better quality of life. So when all of these things come together, when these steps are followed, in fact, the patient would not want to then see the doctor from a patient-doctor point of view. They might come for mind maintenance program rather than coming when things are going wrong. So that is the aim. And in my small way, we have been able to achieve it with few people. And I'm hoping that with sharing this message, more people will come forward and they can also learn the techniques to avoid visiting the doctor when there is an emergency, because we will hope that the emergencies are reduced and people only come for continuous maintenance and improvement.
And this can also be an advice for the new psychiatrist coming to the field.
Of course, well, that is a different topic in itself. And as you can imagine, most of us as doctors are trained in hospitals. Hospitals are places where very sick people visit. So we are very well versed with pathology. What that means is we are very comfortable with disease. In fact, I know of many doctors who get very uncomfortable when they cannot find what is wrong with a patient. I feel very happy when I cannot find that is something wrong with the patient, But sometimes patients are also disappointed. They say, doctor, we thought there must be something seriously wrong, and you say there is nothing wrong. And I'm thinking, shouldn't you be happy about it? There's nothing wrong, that there's something not wrong. So the idea is not to then send them away saying that there's nothing wrong, but encouraging them to look very carefully at the symptom. There is a reason why they came. There could be some element of fear. There was a symptom that they picked up. But we haven't really addressed that issue. We have seen from our point of view, thinking that we are finding some serious problem and we haven't found it. That doesn't mean that the patient's symptom is not valid. So it's very important to validate some of their concerns and to tell them that their symptom cannot be explained by some of the disorders that we know, but we will keep a close eye. That gives the patient a lot of confidence. And you are absolutely right that the current medical system, that is the training and the big system, is looking after the complications and pathology. There has to be more emphasis on prevention, screening. It's work in progress, but I'm confident that it will happen. And again, this will be led by the patient. And in my experience, I see there's a lot of information in the crowd. The crowdsourced information, we call it. People on Google or multiple forums come up with all those sorts of discussions. And so hopefully the new generation of doctors will also learn from patients. And certainly that's what I'm doing. I would say that 90% of the patients, my patients' problems, don't have any solutions in a textbook or research facilities. It has to be in a crowdsourced platform. Patients really help us learn.
താങ്ക് യു ഡോക്ടർ. ശരീരത്തിൻ്റെ ആരോഗ്യം പോലെ തന്നെ മനസ്സിൻ്റെ ആരോഗ്യവും വളരെ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആണ് എന്ന് ഡോക്ടറിൻ്റെ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസസിൽ കൂടെ നമ്മൾ കണ്ടു കഴിഞ്ഞു. താങ്ക് യു സോ മച്ച് ഡോക്ടർ ഫോർ യുവർ വാല്യുബിൾ ടൈം ആൻഡ് ഷെയറിങ് യുവർ നോളജ് വിത്ത് അസ്. താങ്ക് യു സോ മച്ച്.
Thank you very much for having me.
ഇന്നത്തെ ഗോഡ്സ് ഓൺ ഹാൻഡ്സിൻ്റെ എപ്പിസോഡ് ഇവിടെ പൂർണ്ണമാകുന്നു. അടുത്ത ആഴ്ച വീണ്ടും കാണാം. ബൈ.